What happens when you turn a forgotten single chapter manga from 25 years ago into a full anime? And it's by the creator of Gintama. Dandelion is an anime on Netflix that just released in April 2026. It's based on a one-shot manga by Hideki Sorichi, the same author as Gintama. The original manga was just a single chapter released in 2002, over 20 years ago. These single chapter stories are usually just released once and then completely forgotten about. So it's really unusual and unique for this short story to be getting a full anime series almost 25 years later. That alone makes it stand out from most anime adaptations, because usually the industry looks for long-running manga, popular ongoing series, or already established franchises with a proven track record. A tiny one-shot from more than 2 decades ago would normally never be expected to come back like this. The anime has 7 episodes, but because they are mostly 28 minutes long, and there's one double-length episode, the series has the same runtime as the full core of 12 23-minute episodes. The original chapter from 2002 covers only the first 20 minutes of the first episode. The last 7 minutes of that episode, and the rest of the series, is entirely new original content written recently for the anime. It also means that even people who know the original one-shot would still have a lot of new material to experience. That freshness matters a lot because it keeps the anime from feeling like a single, simple nostalgia project. I've never watched Gintama before, so this is my first exposure to anything the author has written. The series is very enjoyable and very funny, but there is also a good mix of action and emotional, touching moments in the series. That balance is one of the things that makes the show work so well. It moves between different modes in a way that keeps the viewer off balance in a good way. One moment it can be absurd and funny, and the next moment it can be sincere and unexpectedly heartfelt. That combination gives the story more weight than you might expect from the premise alone. Even without knowing the author's earlier work, it is easy to tell that he has a strong sense for mixing comedy with emotional storytelling. The series is about angels whose job it is to guide spirits and lost souls into the afterlife and help them pass on. So their job is locating ghosts and helping them resolve any lingering attachments to their previous life so they can move on. And that's just like Rini. I know Rini came out after Dandelion, but Rini fleshed out concepts that were already present in chapters and episodes of Arusa Yatsura, Inuyasha, and Ranma. The world this anime takes place in seems like a cross between Rini and Beetlejuice. The afterlife is a complex bureaucracy, and the actual organization is set up in offices, with the protagonist employees of the organization receiving a salary. That bureaucratic angle gives the setting a lot of personality. Instead of the afterlife being mysterious in a purely spiritual sense, it is treated like an institution with procedures, employees, responsibilities, and rules. That makes the whole premise more amusing, because it turns something cosmic into something mundane and office-like. At the same time, it gives the setting a weirdly grounded feel. Going into this series, I was expecting some wild and crazy humor, and I wasn't let down. There was plenty of comedy all throughout this series. The funniest part was when someone who doesn't know how to drive found herself behind the wheel of a car and proceeded to drive it out of control. She didn't even know what brakes were. That kind of scene captures the show's sense of timing really well. It builds from character ignorance, bad circumstances, and escalating panic until the whole thing becomes absurd. That kind of comedy works because it feels energetic and visually expressive. It also helps that the show seems willing to push a joke all the way until it becomes completely ridiculous, instead of cutting it off too early. The result is that even simple setups can become very memorable. Sometimes the joke is in the full progression of the disaster. What surprised me was the first episode had some sweet, emotional heart and sentimentality. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because series that combine zany comedy with heart and real emotional depth and earnestness aren't exactly uncommon in manga and anime. Still, I wasn't expecting such a sentimental and emotional scene just 15 minutes into the first episode at the time. It was a touching and moving conclusion to the first story. That early emotional payoff helps the episode feel complete, even though the larger series is still just getting started. If a story can catch you off guard with genuine feeling, it tends to leave a stronger impression. That is especially true here, because the emotional material does not feel inserted just to make the story more serious. It feels like it belongs there. The first episode shows that the show is interested in loss, attachment, and closure, not just in supernatural antics. That gives the whole series a stronger foundation. It makes the whole world feel like it has real stakes, even when the tone is playful. Another thing the anime did was explore AI's role in society. I wasn't expecting an examination of the role of AI in society and the use of AI for workplace automation, but that's what the story did in a compelling way. That was probably one of the most surprising parts of the series for me, because it takes the premise in a very engaging direction. A story that begins with ghost, the afterlife, and spiritual resolution suddenly becomes interested in questions that feel extremely current. It raises the idea of what happens when AI enters spaces where people are trying to work and survive. That makes the series feel more inquisitive than I expected. It is one thing for an anime to be funny or emotional, but it is another thing for it to quietly engage with deeper questions. That is a very interesting thing for a series like this to take on. What I wasn't expecting and had no legitimate reason to suspect was that the ending action in the final episode was like a Hollywood blockbuster action movie in the best way possible. It really went big at the end. It was the kind of ending that makes you sit up and pay attention, because suddenly everything feels larger and more dramatic. A final episode like that also leaves a stronger aftertaste, because it gives the show a sense of climax, rather than just winding down. At this point, I'm going to talk about spoilers, so skip ahead to the time on screen if you want to avoid them. What's interesting is the villain was possessed by evil demons, who mostly took control over him. And they changed his personality and got him to do their bidding. It's always interesting when a main villain lets themselves get consumed by desperation and negative emotions, and makes a deal to let demons take over their body. So the real villains were the evil spirits all along, mostly controlling the other guy as a puppet. That adds a nice layer to the conflict, because it blurs the line between individual responsibility and supernatural corruption. It is not just a simple case of a bad person causing problems. Instead, the series is playing with the idea that a character can become weak enough, desperate enough, or twisted enough to open the door to something worse. That kind of setup works especially well in a story about spirits and the afterlife, because it connects the emotional state of the villain with the literal supernatural forces at work. It also makes the final conflict feel more tragic. Even if the possessed villain is still dangerous, there is something sad about a person being swallowed by their own worst impulses, and then used as a vessel for something evil. That gives the antagonist role more texture than a standard stock bad guy would have. The evil spirits being true force behind the chaos also fits the show's larger themes about lingering attachments, unresolved pain, and the danger of not letting go. It's kind of interesting how this series, and Panting and Stalking, started before Rini, but circumstances put those series on ice for more than 10 years, and they weren't completed until after Rini was finished. A story can begin in one era, sit around for years, and then finally alive in a completely different landscape. By the time it appears, it can feel both old and new at the same time. That seems especially true here, because the underlying ideas may have been present for a long time, but the final anime release is occurring in a much later context. It's not often that a single chapter story from years ago gets picked up into an anime. It makes you wonder whether other manga would get similar treatment in the future. There are probably many one-shots and short stories that have been forgotten simply because they never got the chance to be revisited by the industry. Dandelion shows that such a thing is still possible. A short, old, seemingly minor work can be revived and turned into a full series if the right people decide to do it. Overall, Dandelion ended up being much more interesting than I expected. I went in thinking it would mainly be a quirky supernatural comedy, and while it absolutely is that, it also turned out to be more layered than that. It has humor, hard action, and a surprising amount of thematic ambition. It takes a premise that could have been just a small gag story and turns it into something that feels much larger. It also makes me appreciate how a short manga can sometimes become something much bigger if the right adaptation comes along. Even if the original one-shot was only a short portion of the final work, the anime uses that foundation well and expands it into something worth watching on its own. A big takeaway is that it is not just unusual that this anime exists, it is unusual that it works as well as it does, while still feeling connected to something so small and old. That contrast is what makes the whole project memorable. A forgotten one-shot from 2002 became a full anime in 2026, and somehow that strange fact ends up being one of the most interesting things about this show.